Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study. A plain and simple study, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse of the entire Bible. Currently we are in 2 Chronicles chapter 29. I'm going to try to get through chapter 31. This is the first part of King Hezekiah's life. He is one of the best kings in Israel. He was a good king, and we will see a little of, as with all of us, our human faults, his pride. More on that later. Also, you should know that Hezekiah is just, again, around the 80-year mark of the lead up to the fall of Babylon. And so keep that in mind as a timeline. We're on a fast track to Babylon. And remember the writing of the prophets. The writing of the prophets. That segment of the Old Testament, so you got the major and the minor. And if you guys, when we get to this section, we're going to study it different, and I'll wait till I get there. We're going to do it from a timeline, a chronological perspective. More on that when we get way down there. But when you get to Isaiah and then also Hezekiah, because remember, right around Hezekiah's time, the prophet Isaiah is going to show up on the scene. And you could say that this kind of began really God's prophetic word to Israel to change their way. Actually, at this point, Judah, to change their way. Judgment is coming. Change their way. And so all of the writing of the prophets sort of has center around that. This timeline to the Babylonian exile. All right, chapter 29, verse 1 says, Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. So Hezekiah again was one of the ones you could say he was a good, righteous king. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the Lord's temple and repaired them. Now, again, right away you see the success for any king, any leadership, any kingdom, is you establish true worship of God. Okay? And of course, Israel had fallen away. And sometimes we're going to get a glimpse of just how far they have fallen away. Verse 4, then he brought in the priests and the Levites and gathered them in the eastern public square. He said to them, hear me, Levites, consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, removing everything impure from the holy place. Now that's telling, because there never should have been anything impure. And you'll remember, as we read through, that there were kings that actually put idols in the temple. Okay? Ahaz was one of them, his predecessor. Verse 6. For our fathers were unfaithful and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord our God. They abandoned him, turned their faces away from the Lord's tabernacle, and turned their backs on him. They also closed the door to the protocol, extinguished the lamps, and did not burn incense, and did not offer burnt offerings in the holy place of the God of Israel. Therefore, the wrath of God was on Judah and Jerusalem, and he made them an object of terror and horror, mockery, as you see with your own eyes. Now, if you remember in the last study, Ahaz, Israel was convicted by God of their treatment of the Judaites here, the Judaizers. Okay, their brethren. They tortured them, raped them, paraded them naked, was trying to sell them into slavery. Verse 9, our fathers fell by the sword, and your sons, our daughters and our wives are in captivity because of this. It is in my heart to make a covenant with Yahweh, the God of Israel, so that his burning anger may turn away from us. My sons, don't be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand in his presence and to serve him, and to be his ministers and burners of incense. So this is again the very first thing of it really establishing any kind of true prophet is to establish any kind of stability in the community, in the country, in the nation, in the people. You have to first establish true worship of God. Then the Levites stood up, and again I'm going to go through these, so forgive my butchering of the pronunciation, Hebrew pronunciations. Mathath, son of Amasiah, and Joel, son of Azariah from the Korites, Kish, the son of Abdi, and Azariah, and of Jeliah from the Metherites, Joah, son of Zimha, of Eden, son of Joad, and the Gershites, Shimi and Jewel from the Elisaphites, Zechariah and Mattin from Asaphites, Jehiel and Shimi from the Hemanites, Shemanites and Uzziel from the Judanites. He said, they gathered their brothers together and consecrated themselves and went according to the king's command by the word of the Lord to cleanse the temple. Now again, the temple never should have been uncleansed, but this cleansing involved not only actually cleaning it up, but purifying it from all of the sinful practice that was going on. Verse 16, the priests went to the entrance of the Lord's temple and to cleanse it. They took all the unclean things they found in the Lord's sanctuary to the courtyards of the Lord's temple. Then the Levites received them and took them outside to the Kidron Valley. They began to concentrate on the first day of the first month, and on the eighth day of the month, they came to the protocol of the Lord's temple. They consecrated the Lord's temple for 8 days, and on the 16th day of the first month, they finished. Then they went inside to King Hezekiah and said, we have cleansed the whole temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offerings, and all the utensils, and the table for the roll of bread of presence, and all of its utensils. We have set up and consecrated the utensils that King Ahaz rejected during his reign when he became unfaithful. They are in front of the Lord's altar. They are in front of the altar of the Lord. Then King Hezekiah got up early, gathered the city's officials, went to the Lord's temple. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 lambs, 7 male goats, and a sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary, and for Judah. Then he told the descendants of Aaron, the priest, to offer them on the altar of the Lord. Now, you see, Hezekiah is careful to follow the law. If you remember David, when he wanted to establish worship, bring the ark back, he did it. He did it wrong. He didn't have the priest carry the ark. Notice Hezekiah is careful about following the laws of God here. In fact, if you remember, go back to the book of Leviticus, you'll see how tedious all that was when we read it. Well, he's careful to follow that. Then they brought the goats, verse 9. Then they brought the goats for the sin offering into the presence of the king and the congregation, who laid their hands on them. The priests slaughtered the goats and put their blood on the altar for a sin offering and to make atonement for all of Israel. And the king said that the burnt offering and sin offerings were for all Israel. Hezekiah, now, when he says all Israel by here, he's really meaning Judah, because remember at this time, Israel is being deported to the Assyrians. Verse 25. Hezekiah stationed the Levites in the Lord's temple with cymbals, harps, lyres, according to the command of David, Gad, the king's seer, and then Nathan the prophet, for the command was from the Lord his prophet. The Levites stood with the instruments of David, and the priests with the trumpets. Then Hezekiah ordered that the burnt offerings be offered on the altar. When the burnt offerings began, the song of the Lord and the trumpets began to accompany. The song of the Lord and the trumpets began again, accompanied by the instruments of David, king of Israel. The whole assembly was worshiping, singing the song, and blowing the trumpet. All of this continued until the burnt offering was complete. When the burnt offering were complete, the king and all those present with him bowed down and worshipped. Then King Hezekiah and the officials told the Levites to sing praises to the Lord in the words of David and of Asaph the seer. So they sang praises with rejoicing and bowed in worship. Hezekiah concluded, "Now you are consecrated to the Lord. Come near and bring sacrifice and thank offerings to the Lord's temple. Sing." So the congregation brought the sacrifices and thank offering. All those with a willing heart brought burnt offerings. Now notice the term willing heart here. And just kind of imagine, think back to just think back to all of the offerings you might have witnessed in churches today. And notice there was never no priming, no coaxing. Notice God wants you to give with a willing heart. Verse 32, the number of the burnt offerings the congregation brought was 70 bulls, 100 rams, 200 lambs. All these were for the burnt offerings to the Lord. 600 bulls and 3,000 sheep were consecrated. However, since there was not enough priests, they weren't able to skin all of the burnt offerings, so the Levites' brothers helped helped them until the work was finished and until the priests consecrated themselves. For the Levites were more conscious to consecrate themselves than the priests were. Furthermore, the burnt offerings were abundant along with the fat of the fellowship offering and with the drink offering for the burnt offering. So the service of the Lord's temple was established, and Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over how God had prepared the people. For it came about suddenly. In other words, they didn't really plan this out. Give me a hard time here. Here we go. Let's go to chapter 30. It says, then Hezekiah sent word throughout Israel and Judah, and he also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh to come to the Lord's temple in Jerusalem to observe the Passover of Yahweh, the God of Israel. For the king and his officials and the entire congregation in Jerusalem decided to observe the Passover of the Lord in the second month because they were not able to observe it at the appropriate time. Not enough of the priests had consecrated themselves, and the people hadn't been gathered together in Israel. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is one of the first times you see in the long time that they kept really the actual festivals, let alone the Passover. Remember, there were 3 major festivals that Israel was to keep. Now, for really almost hundreds of years, they have not been keeping any of them. Now, so this is one of the first times that they've actually kept it. And what also interesting about this is that, notice, they didn't keep it in the month that God had commanded to get to it. The reason I'm bringing this up is because religious people always think that God is so strict as far as procedures and laws. And I want to be careful here. That people think that he values that over people. In other words, the reason why they decided not to keep the Passover in the appropriate time frame doesn't mean that God rejected them. Verse 4, the proposal pleased the king and the congregation, so they affirmed the proposal and spread messages throughout all of Israel, to Beersheba and Dan, come to observe the Passover of Yahweh, the God of Israel in Jerusalem, for they had not observed it often as prescribed. So the carriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the hand of the king and his officials, and according to the king's command, saying, Israelites, return to Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, so he may return to those of you who remain, who have escaped from the wrath of the king of Assyria. Now, this is kind of interesting here that he's reaching out beyond to the northern tribes. Remember, at this time, right here, and this is kind of the confirmation of a time frame, the northern tribes were being conquered by the Assyrians as a direct judgment of God, and they were being deported. Now, he said, those of you all who have escaped, he says, come and join us, those of you that escaped. And this is kind of interesting because even though they were a divided kingdom at this time, they still were and should have always considered themselves one from the descendants of Abraham. And so here you have Hezekiah reaching out to them saying, hey, come join us. Verse 7, don't be like your fathers and your brothers who were unfaithful to Yahweh, the God of our ancestors, so that he made them an object in horror, as you yourselves see. Don't become obstinate. Now like your fathers did, give your allegiance to Yahweh and come to his sanctuary that he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that he may turn his burning anger away from you. When you return to Yahweh, your brothers and your sons, you will receive mercy in the presence of their captors and will return to this land. For the Yahweh, your God, is gracious and merciful. He will not turn his face away from you if you will return to him. Repentance is always, God always hears the heart of a repentant person. Mercy, that when you ask God for mercy, he is always, always, always merciful. The carriers traveled from city, verse 10, to the land of Ephraim, Manasseh, as far as Zebulun. But the inhabitants laughed at him and mocked him. Now, this is kind of sad, because at the very time they're being conquered. Now, later on, we're going to see this even with Judah. The sinfulness of man. What is amazing is you see this obstinate heart here as they are being conquered. The words of the prophets are coming true. As they are being conquered, they're mocking. They're still hardening their hearts against God. Verse 12. Also, the power of God was at work in Judah to unite them, to carry out the command of the king and his officials by the word of the Lord. A very large assembly of people was gathered in Jerusalem to observe the festival of unleavened bread in the second month. They proceeded to take away the altars that were in Jerusalem. They took away the incense altars and threw them into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb, and on the 14th day of the second month, the priests and Levites were ashamed, and they consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the Lord's temple. They stood at the prescribed post according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priest sprinkled the blood received from the hand of the Levites, for there were many in the assemblies who had not consecrated themselves. So the Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover lamb for every unclean person to consecrate the lambs to the Lord. So the problem is that they wasn't doing what they should have been doing in their priestly duties. Verse 18. A large number of people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, were ritually unclean, yet they had eaten the Passover contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah had interceded for them. May the good Lord provide atonement on behalf of whoever sets his whole heart on seeking God, Yahweh, the God of the answers, even though not according to the purification rules of the sanctuary. So in other words, they were breaking the law, and he's asking God for mercy. Verse 20. So the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem observed the festival in unleavened bread 7 days with great joy. And the Levites and the priests praised the Lord day after day with loud instruments. Then Hezekiah encouraged all the Levites who performed skillfully before the Lord, and they ate the appointed festival for 7 days, sacrificing fellowship offerings and giving thanks to the Lord, the God of Israel's ancestors. Then the whole congregation decided to observe 7 more days. So they observed 7 days with joy. For Hezekiah, king of Israel, contributed 1,000 bulls, 7,000 sheep for the congregation. Also, the officials contributed 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep for the congregation, and many priests consecrated themselves. Now, I said this before, they had a lot of sheep, which means there was a lot of bloodshed here. A lot of bloodshed. Verse 25. Then the whole assembly of Judah, with the priests and Levites, and the whole assembly that came from Israel, the foreigners who came from the land of Israel, and those who were living in Judah rejoiced. Now, remember, it's funny that they're calling them foreigners, but they were of God because they were of the descendants of Abraham. There was great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for nothing like this was known since the days of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. So you can see this kind of celebration, the way it should have been done, hadn't been kept since Solomon. Then the priests and the Levites stood and blessed the people, and God heard their voice, and their prayer came into his holy dwelling place in heaven. So again, the good rulership of Hezekiah, who followed God with his heart. And as we can see right here, you know, the Passover was kept like no other. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video. Subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next chapter. Actually, I did not finish chapter 31, so we're going to start in chapter 31. All right.